Welcome to Between the Gutters, where we talk about the stories within the panels. I'm your co-host Albert. A review of another comic that we want to expose the world to. Today, the comic that we're going to be discussing is Box Office Poison. It's by Alex Robinson, who wrote and illustrated it. So, it's something that he clearly cared. It's something that he clearly cared a lot about and put a lot of his effort and heart into. So, Drew, if you have any of the more of the details that you could give to our listeners, please fill us in.
Okay, so Box Office Poison by Alex Robinson was a comic book series originally serialized by an independent comic book publisher, Antarctic Press, back in October 1996 through October 2000. It ran for 21 issues. It's a black and white indie comic. When it was collected into a trade paperback edition, Top Shelf became the publisher. The trade paperback edition, it gets reprinted pretty regularly. There are a few different editions floating around. You can find it on Comixology or order a physical copy from your local comic book store or online retailer. So Box Office Poison, it's a work that won, or at least was nominated for, quite a few awards. Alex Robinson's not necessarily like a household name, even if you're a comics fan, but back in the early 2000s, he definitely had a higher profile because of books like Box Office Poison and Tricked, which were nominated for different awards. So Box Office Poison was nominated for a Harvey, an Eisner, and an Ig Nobel. It did win an Eisner that year for talent deserving of wider recognition. Also, the French edition of Box Office Poison won an award at Angoulême in 2005, which is one of the biggest international comics festivals in the entire world. So it's a book and a creator with accolades. Hefty piece of work. It's 600 something pages. I guess we decided to read it because we both ended up finding cheap copies of it at some point.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly happenstance, but I don't want our listeners to think that that's the only reason to read. Deserving of any good comics podcast that's worth its salt, I'd say.
Yeah, exactly. And we both already knew who Alex Robinson was, so I was going to buy this comic at some point anyway. I just got lucky that I found it for cheap. But I actually read his second years ago. I read that maybe not right when it came out, but maybe like a year or two after it came out.
Yeah.
And Tricked is kind of similar to Box Office Poison. It's even got like one of the main characters in Tricked is in Box Office Poison, but it's not really a sequel to it. A novel called Too Cool to Be Forgotten, which was would you say that's one of the few time travel stories that you can appreciate, Albert?
I would definitely say that. I'm trying to see if there's a way I can finesse it so that I don't have to acknowledge that it's necessarily about the time travel itself.
Albert, no like time travel.
Yeah, I don't want to give it that level of credit. I will say this. For a story about time travel, I will say this. For a story about time travel, it's the time travel isn't really the primary thing to focus on in that story. It's really more about his experiences and his formative experiences and reevaluating those to see reevaluating his formative experiences to help him work out his emotional problems in the modern day. So that's,
there you go.
I prefer that to he went back in time to sleep with a teenage girl that he always wanted to go out with, and now and now his life is better because of it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, but it's interesting that we both read Alex Robinson's later works and then went back to his first big later works and then went back to his first big comic. So it's kind of like doing our own version of time traveling where we're working backwards
Yeah.
into his bibliography.
Well, to be fair, I think my first exposure to Alex Robinson. Was from you. So I believe you. If I want to say you probably read Tricked first, and I think you gave me your copy or something like that, and then I read that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and
Then
that's
you gave me back my copy because I still have it.
Oh, maybe you just let me borrow it or something like that.
Did you think I would give away something that precious to you for free?
Oh.
Have I ever given you a gift?
You give me the gift of your sweet charisma.
Hey Albert. Hey Albert. Albert.
Yeah, this
Hey.
is a totally different
Hey,
podcast
Albert.
than I was expecting to be on.
What are you wearing right now, Albert?
That I'm feeling.
That's a good answer.
Thank
That
you.
is a good answer.
Thank you. There is no amount of coverage that will warm me from those chills.
So we are here to talk about indie comic. Albert, if we were to give a brief synopsis of this book, what would it be?
So, without giving away too much or getting too into detail, I think I would just say that it's the story of a small community of friends in their 20s, just somewhat aimlessly and trying to sort out their various issues and problems, whether it be professional or personal, including relationships or familial problems, whatever they may have, and slice of their life, a period of time in their lives where just so much is going on, and
Yeah.
it just follows them through this period. And yeah, that I would say that that's the brief explanation of it, description of it. That it's a story where, if I had to guess, like I'm not sure what everyone's exact age is, and there are definitely people who are in different age brackets in over the course of the story, people that we follow, but primarily I would say everyone's I think in their 20s.
Yeah, I believe so.
Because so much of the story is about, again, it's about being aimless, and I do think that people in their 20s, it's a pretty common theme for people just exiting college and entering the world and being adults for the first time and having to reconcile all of the different feelings and experiences that they're having.
Yeah, it's got a cast of, I don't know. Yeah, it's got a cast of, I don't know, maybe a dozen people,
Yeah.
notable characters. So it really is a hard series to just give a really brief synopsis because everybody, every character has their own, every character has their own plot and story, but the work as a whole entity, it's not quite such a clear cut. You start from point A and end at point B. You start from point A and end at point B.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the end, because all these different characters have stories. Some of them interweave with each other. Some of them don't necessarily affect other characters, but every character still has a story, and they all live in this in occasionally cross paths.
Yeah. And I think that's also a testament to just Alex Robinson's skill, because, someone's ability to write such a large ensemble cast, that is a hard thing to do, and to be seamless and not clumsy and just painful to read.
Yeah,
Like, it's that should be a testament to Alex Robinson's skill as a writer in and of itself.
yeah, definitely. It's like with the story. I mean, I'd say that's pretty accurate
Yeah,
because this is really it's like 600 pages long, but the story takes place over a period of, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 months or something. I don't think it's really specified how much time passes, but I'm pretty
yeah,
sure it's not more than a year. So it really is like a slice of life in terms of just being a witness to some key moments uh, in a small period of all of these characters' lives. In a small period of all of these characters' lives,
yeah, absolutely.
and it's also one of those genres. I think when people say slice of life, I feel like a pretty common criticism is that nothing happens. A pretty common criticism is that nothing happens, or there's no plot, or something denigrating like that, something
Yeah,
dismissive. Me personally, I'm actually a pretty decently big fan of slice of life. I mean, obviously there are going to be poorly done slice of life. I mean, obviously there are going to be poorly done slice of life stories,
yeah,
just like any other genre.
yeah,
But in terms of personal appeal, slice of life is something that does draw me in more than
yeah,
other. Like if you told me, if you asked me to watch like, I don't know, a medical drama or something, I'd probably be more interested in a slice of life show,
yeah,
even if I
yeah,
didn't know what that slice of life was about.
yeah. Like, to your point about how there are the idea of slice of life comics as a genre as a whole. Um, yeah, I think me personally, I I'm pretty drawn to slice of life as a genre as well. I don't know what it is. Like, I that don't like it. I like, you just
I
meant
like how you
no.
said you can't pinpoint what's wrong with the people that don't like it. So
Yeah.
your problem's not with the genre, it's with the people that don't like it.
Well, I mean, but it's true. It's well, I I don't think saying that it's not about anything is accurate, because for me personally, I think the appeal for slice of life for me is in the observation, right? It requires that you exercise your observational skills, and it's kind of that impressionist idea of being able to sit for a long time and observe and to deconstruct what it is that you're observing, right?
Hmm.
Now, if if they sit there and they don't get anything from watching something, from observing life happen, if there aren't any lessons or takeaways that they can uh, get from the deconstructed on their own,
Uh-huh.
maybe that's not for everybody. Like, I personally, I think people as a whole would be better off being more reflective,
Yeah,
but uh
I agree.
but it's hard to tell someone who doesn't understand that, or who's that they might be better off as people if they did it.
I like how you're able to explain what slice of life is to you, while at the same time just slapping people that don't like it. it, it,
Uh,
it that was it,
uh,
that was like a very diplomatic backhanded slap.
well, yeah, I wanted to be able to phrase it in a way that if someone who didn't to be able to phrase it in a way that if someone who didn't appreciate slice of life was listening to it, that they might be able to absorb and comprehend what I was telling them, and maybe just maybe they might reevaluate themselves. So
Yeah.
I didn't want to outright slap them, but there was a tinge of disdain for them in my description. I'll admit that.
Yeah, I think the tinge came through, man.
Yeah, yeah.
But I totally feel what you're saying, man, because when it comes to slice of life, the appeal for me is probably the fact that when it's done well, there is an artful and poetic quality to it. Because events or a story that is fairly common or ordinary, it's something that could happen in an average person's life. But when it's framed as a story that we consume, we're because it's not our life, it's a story that we're reading. We're able to
Yeah.
step back and, like you said, reflect or contemplate what is actually going on. Like even if it's something like American Splendor and Harvey Pekar writing a story about his, like there's still something he's still able to draw out the humor and the comedy
Yeah.
inherent in everyday kind of
Yeah.
situations and things like that. I feel like
Yeah.
with a lot of fiction, right? Like a lot of fiction, the goal of a lot of fiction is to help generate empathy so that you can learn, understand, and appreciate the world better.
Yeah.
And when slice of life is done well, then you really do get an opportunity to appreciate that because
Yeah.
it'll bring out those kind of qualities that help you as the reader. That help you as the reader. I guess number one, you can learn about a different character or a different someone who's just a different person than who you are, and then secondly,
Yeah.
the situations that they're in, even if it's something that you may never
Yeah.
the situations that they're in, even if it's something that you may never find yourself in, it gives you an idea or a chance to imagine what
Right.
it might be like if you were to experience something like that and how might you react.
Yeah.
Or
Well,
thirdly, it could even just be something where the story itself is just crafted. Thirdly, it could even just be something where the story itself is just crafted in an artful manner that
yeah.
it gives you a chance to think about just the beauty of creativity,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Well, I was gonna add one other thing. Not quite a counterpoint to what you were saying. I do think that the thing about slice of life that I would want to add is that I don't necessarily think it's necessarily about experiences that are foreign to us. If
Hmm.
anything, I think a lot of the experiences that they describe tend to be mundane and relatable,
Yeah.
and it's our ability to see in how they react and how they express themselves. It's in observing that it allows us to reflect on ourselves, on how we would behave under those situations and circumstances. So like I do think there's definitely an aspect of it where it's it could be stories that are different from whatever your day-to-day life is, but the
It could
opposite
also be something
also.
that's very similar.
Exactly.
This genre of storytelling. So I guess something that can resonate with so many people, because
Yeah.
if you even have just the slightest amount of imagination, then
Yeah.
you should be able to understand and appreciate.
Yeah.
You should be able to understand and appreciate what's happening. Now, of course, in bad slice of life, you'll see stories where they'll tell a story about something mundane, but it just won't be interesting, or but it just won't be interesting, or it won't really have much of a point. Like I guess there is kind of a fine line, but
Yeah.
it's the same line that exists with any type of genre, because there's good science fiction stories and bad science fiction. There's good science fiction stories and bad science fiction stories. There's good
Absolutely.
crime stories, there's bad crime stories, and
Yeah.
there are always going to be like a few key elements here and there that can really affect the quality of a story. But the thing with Box Office Poison, to get back to the book we're discussing, is that the slice of life element here is so inherent to the concept of the book. It becomes a sprawling, almost like a mini epic, because there are so many characters, and every character is living, I would say, it's not a life that I personally experienced. Like, I never really did the things that these characters were doing when I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure I know people that did do those things,
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Like,
it is realistic in the sense
yeah.
that in real
Yeah.
life. Like, I've known horrible slobs that can't keep their place clean,
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
just people that are crazy messy and don't really care about keeping their apartment clean.
Yeah.
I've known people that really hate their mundane job.
Complain about it.
Yeah, and all they do is
Like,
complain. Yeah.
yeah. And a large portion of the story is about, romantic relationships and, people in their 20s. I mean, I've heard. So
I've heard there's this thing that exists called romance. Times when a man loves a woman.
Exactly. So, I may not have had a bunch of relationships, if any, in my 20s, but,
I have an active imagination. Does that count?
No, it doesn't. And so ends another episode of Between the Gutters. Oh, man. Yeah, but no, exactly. It's these characters, they're just regular 20-somethings that, that are bad at relationships. And it's not like we're reading a comic about firefighters on Mars or something like that. It's totally relatable. Even for someone who didn't date any, if at all, in their I thought you had more to say.
Made there, but I kind of held my tongue.
I thought you were gonna have more to say, but all I was faced with was deafening silence. More to say, but all I was faced with was deafening silence.
Well, there was also a little bit of laughter, but the laughter was only there because my alternative was to cry and sob.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as we talk about Box Office Poison, I think for you listeners, if you haven't read this comic, maybe our discussion is going to be, I don't know, maybe it'll be hard to follow, but hopefully our discussion is going to be, I don't know, maybe it'll be hard to follow, but hopefully whatever we talk about will inspire you or motivate you to check this book out, because it is a great piece of work. Alex Robinson is a really talented cartoonist, and like we were saying earlier, he's won all sorts of awards.
Yeah.
And this book, we were saying earlier, he's won all sorts of awards.
Yeah.
And this book is absolutely worth your time. it's long, like we said, it's 600 pages, but I didn't ever feel like it was a slog to get through. It was something that I kind of devoured over a couple of days and just really enjoyed.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I'd say the experience was the same for me. Like, I think initially looking at it, it was kind of daunting just because it's a thick book and there's definitely a lot of words. But there's definitely a lot of words. But having finished reading it just before this podcast, actually, um, I'll admit it was. I want to say laborious, but not in a bad way. I want to say laborious, but not in a bad way. You know, like
Yeah.
it did take a lot of work to like actually read it, but I did enjoy it, the experience of reading it. So,
Yeah, I mean, it definitely took me a couple hours for sure, and I
yeah,
didn't do it all in one sitting. But
yeah,
it's
exactly.
it's it's like reading a prose novel, you know. Like most of the time, we don't read a prose novel in one sitting either, but we
Yeah,
still enjoy it every time we pick it up.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
think this book kind of reminds me of that. Like number one, because it is thick, and secondly, because like you said, there are a lot of word balloons filled with text, and
Yeah,
there's even a couple of pages that just have prose printed on them because one of the characters is an aspiring writer,
right.
so you
Yeah,
get to read the stories that he wants to write and
yeah,
submit
yeah,
to magazines and stuff.
yeah,
So there. But
yeah,
if you, I assume that if you like good stories, you don't mind reading, so you can handle some word balloons here and there.
yeah,
And Alex Robinson, his storytelling as a cartoonist is, even though this is one of his earlier works, I still think it flowed to the art that when you're reading scenes, they just move by so quickly because you just want to keep on reading the dialogue and the pictures that accompany them. You know, like every panel is just so easy to read. There's never anything confusing. Uh, that just you can tell he's just having fun. Like I remember
yeah,
seeing a spread where the characters are at the skating park in the ice skating park in the winter, and there's all these different little characters in the background, and he even drew in Where's Waldo in one of the corners. It's
yeah,
like little things like that. That overall, man, it's just a breeze to read, even though it takes a long time to read it.
yeah, yeah. No, I remember that ice skating scene too. Like, well, actually, I don't remember if there were multiple ice skating scenes. So I think we're talking about the same one. But
Yeah, there was just that one big ice skate.
that scene, one of the characters, Sherman, at one point starts dancing with his friend's cousin, and I thought the way that they drew that, it was pretty majestic. If like
Yeah,
if I don't know if there's any other way to describe it, but the elegance of their motion in that one moment, or in that like page, if not couple of pages, it's
it's just great
it's
cartooning. Like you
yeah,
said, the elegance of their motion. It's
it's
kind
beautiful.
of like watching animation or something.
Yeah, yeah,
Watching animation or something.
yeah, yeah. He captures just how like, yeah, how soft and how elegant they move. But totally.
Were there any characters that stood out to you, or were there any characters that stood out to you, or did you have any particular favorites?
Um, I have to go back because I can't remember all their names just because there are so many of them.
Yeah,
Uh, I would say I will I would say I will admit that I I did like Stephen Goodell. He's like this older hippie guy that is in a relationship
Jane.
with Jane, and relationship
Jane.
with Jane, and he seemed like a cool dude. I like there's no real other way to describe it. I think his story was overall not one of the more interesting ones, but I think overall not one of the more interesting ones, but I think him as a character was someone that how do I put this? I
Did you
guess
relate to him?
I wouldn't say that it was a matter of relating to him. I'd say that in this is a matter of relating to him. I'd say that in this series where there are just a lot of abrasive personalities, and I wouldn't say that they were all bad, but he seemed like he was generally he seemed like he was generally a calming presence whenever he showed up,
Yeah, he was
or a
chill.
light presence.
He seemed like the kind of guy that you could actually be friends with.
Yeah, exactly. So as a character, I liked him. I wouldn't say I cared about him more than the others because I did never feel like his plot was one that put him at any risk or anything like that. I never felt like his story was one in which he had anything to lose.
Yeah, that's because he was the oldest or one of the oldest of the young characters at least. Like
Yeah,
there's that Irving Flavor is the oldest character, but I think other than the really old guy, Steven was the oldest
second.
of the people
Yeah,
in their 20s, you know. He might have
yeah,
if everybody else was in there, maybe that gave him an aura of maturity. So it didn't. You're right. It didn't feel like he was ever at a.
yeah,
He didn't have to risk very much or anything like that. But he was always just kind of this calming or
yeah.
stable presence. Like his life felt like it was already more an.
Well, okay, so basically his plot in their friend group was he was in a long-term relationship with one of the other characters by the
Jane.
name of Jane, and it felt like a story that really jumped out, at least for me, was uh there was this one section where they go home for the holidays to meet her parents, and well, not meet her parents, they've met her parents before, but to visit.
Yeah, Christmas
um
time.
yeah, and at this point it's established that Jane, at least in terms of relationships, is, I guess, she's kind of the rebel because everyone else has taken a more traditional track and they've settled down and they've gotten married, and Jane were, I guess, they're a pretty unconventional couple, at least relative to the rest of the family, and not not necessarily because they didn't want to get married either. Like Stephen, I think Jane turns him down, and they end up just being in this long-term relationship with each other. And so in the story, when they go home for the holidays, um, I guess they sort of stick out like a green thumb, because here you have this entire family line, and for a brief instance, Stephen is pulled into that. So at one point, Jane's dad, he asks Stephen to come out to the garage to help him with something, and he wants Stephen to be Santa Claus this Christmas because he's getting too old to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I just thought that was a pretty like moving moment, because prior to that moment, you even see him and Jane on the plane talking about kids. He wouldn't want to lie to them. The idea of lying to them through Santa Claus is something that he finds unsavory. And now, like, he's caught up in this thing where he understands the value of tradition and he understands the value of what he's doing. And at one point, there's this little girl who's already aged out of the idea of Santa Claus, and Steven comes in as Santa Claus and he sees her unmoved by his presence, while all the other little kids are all about Santa Claus, and there's a part of him that aches at the thought of it, and there's a part of him that aches at the thought of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
I, yeah, I think when I read that, it registered with me, but it wasn't until you just brought it up right now that it resonates,
Yeah.
now that it resonates,
Yeah.
like what you pointed out, that definitely does highlight that moment in his story now for me in a
Yeah.
way that I didn't really think about when I was reading it.
Yeah. I so like I mentioned earlier, I like Steven's story or storyline throughout the series, there aren't a lot of like peaks or lows to it, because we're just watching him be in a relationship with Jane. Throughout the series. There's not like a lot of drama, but that moment was a high point for it in their story.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Actually, since you brought it up,
You know.
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Actually, since you brought it up, I'm curious now, man. But would you tell kids that there is no Santa Claus?
Um. Whew. I'll tell other people's kids.
I like that. I like that. That's great, man.
I have no problem ruining Christmas for other people. The
Dude,
other character.
one
Oh,
time when I used to work at an elementary school.
yeah.
One
Oh,
time when I used to work at an elementary school,
yeah.
there was this 6-year-old girl that was telling me that she had lost a tooth, right? And she put it under her pillow that night, and she got 50 cents in the morning. And she showed me the money and I was like, oh, that's cool. The tooth fairy came by and gave you some money. And then she made a face at me, like she rolled her eyes at me, and she was like, everybody knows the tooth fairy's not real. My parents gave me this money. And then I looked at her. I kneeled down, so we were at eye level, and I was like, "T real?" And then her jaw just kind of slowly dropped, and you could see that her mind was churning, and there was surprise in her eyes. And then she thought about it for a few moments, and she said, "I don't know." And then she quickly turned around and walked.
She didn't like being deconstructed.
Yeah, pretty much. I think that's the closest I've ever gotten to telling a little kid that Santa isn't real.
At
But I
the
felt
end of
like
the
she brought
day,
that upon herself.
at the end of the day, you didn't have the heart.
I didn't explicitly tell her that Santa wasn't real, but
Yeah.
because her game to question Santa.
That's yeah, she's gonna be in therapy for a while. That's great. That's great. I'm about that.
Yeah, because it's not your kid.
Exactly. I don't have to pay the bills. Yeah, and in terms of other characters that I did like, you might find this a little hard to believe, but I I found that I actually did like Dorothy Lestrade.
Oh.
I think there's clearly something about her that's abrasive on the surface, but I think as the story goes on and as I observed her more, there was something about her that I found pretty pitiable.
So you liked her because you felt sorry for her?
I guess thinking about it now, maybe I didn't like her, but
You were interested in her
I
as a
was
character in
rooting
the
for
story.
her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was interested in her as a character in the story, and I think I was rooting for her to get some sort of a happy ending, or whatever uh their equivalent of a happy ending is in this in this
Mm-hmm.
world of theirs. So,
Yeah,
uh, yeah,
I could see that. It's one of those. She's one of those characters that. It's one of those. She's one of those characters that has a lot of flaws, but for all her flaws, she's definitely fun to read about. Like, I
yeah,
don't know if I could
she's
really get
interesting.
along well with somebody like that.
Yeah,
Really get
interesting.
along well with somebody like that.
Yeah,
Uh, just because she's so messy. She's an alcoholic,
yeah,
and yeah, she just seems like a really hard person to get along with.
yeah,
But as long as I don't have to be her friend, but as long as I don't have to be her friend and I could just read about her life,
yeah.
yeah, totally, man. I'm all about that action.
Well, I think the thing about her is right from the get-go, right from the beginning, everyone seems to be
The
knocking
other
everyone seems to be
the other
knocking her
characters
as a
don't like
character.
her.
Exactly. The other characters don't like her, and who's her boyfriend? Sherman?
Yeah.
He's the only one who seems to like her, and he seems to like her for pretty superficial reasons, at least at first. He seems to like her for pretty superficial reasons, at least at first. And
Yeah.
but the way that I see it, at least, messiness aside, and like whatever her other flaws may be, like he seems to be worse for her than she is for him. He seems to be worse for her than she is for him.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean,
What
that
do you
might be
what do you mean by
debatable,
that?
because he's like right at the beginning of the story when you learn about Sherman's romantic history. He's just a dude who seems romantic history. He's just a dude who seems like he's got a history of, I guess he's kind of selfish in his relationships, you know?
Yeah, he's definitely a selfish character.
Yeah. Yeah. And, although all for, you know, whatever her flaws might be, her just the chaotic nature of her personality, like I I do think that his selfishness is ultimately worse than any of those things that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, Sherman was a character in the book where his flaws made him somebody where he was another character. If I knew somebody like that in real life, I don't think I would get along with him or even want to
Yeah.
be his friend.
Yeah.
He was definitely fascinating, very
Yeah.
interesting plot.
I also think we spend the most amount of time, I want to say, on their story.
Yeah,
They're
that's what
like
it
one
feels
of,
like.
yeah. If they're not the A story I'm with, they're at least the second,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. There's definitely a lot of space devoted to them,
Yeah.
but it is interesting that you mentioned how you said was it he's worse for her than she is for him?
I think
She brings out the worst aspects of his character and
well,
he
I would
doesn't really
say
make her worse, or like what do you I want to unpack that
I would
what you
say
said.
that his selfishness does more damage to her in the long run than any of her like behaviors do to him.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
so okay, so you said that the things that we learn about Dorothy at the beginning, at least through the other characters, is she's messy and she's manipulative. Like they point to things like she borrows money that she doesn't return. Things like
Yeah.
that, right?
That's pretty annoying. You're talking about like hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
Right. But well, okay, maybe this is me equivocating on her behalf or whatever, but they only mention they only mention it that one time, and they only show that one scene where he borrows some money, where she borrows like $100 from Sherman at the beginning, and we don't ever see that again, right?
But
So
she also owed hundreds of dollars to her old roommates. Owed hundreds of dollars to her old roommates, Stephen and Jane.
that's true. But what I'm saying is, even if that's the case, I mean, she did say that she was working to pay them off. Say that she was working to pay them off. So what I was gonna say was, throughout the rest of the series, I don't really feel like we see that come up again, right?
Yeah,
Or maybe if it did come up, like it didn't,
yeah.
or maybe if it did come up, like it didn't feel like it was a big part of her personality in spite of what they had said.
But
So
let me
so
ask
it
you
was,
this: did she
yeah,
ever pay back the money to Jane and Stephen?
I don't know.
Yeah, I feel
Like I
like I don't think she did.
yeah.
So a bunch of their money, like she lied about paying them back.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like I can I can put that up in the air, cuz for all I know, they didn't explicitly say that she didn't pay them back. It's true though. I mean, like, all I'm saying is, as far as her story goes, after the mention of the money issue that first time, they established that her character flaw is that she uses people for their money until, but what do we
Well, I don't
see?
even know if that's what they were saying about her. I got like for the way I interpreted it was she was so thoughtless or maybe unwise with her finances that she would borrow money from people and not pay them back. And it's not necessarily it doesn't maliciously setting out to rip people off or steal their money, but it could be like the people that we've met in real life where they ask to borrow some money because of whatever reason, and then they just never end up paying you back, and every time you hit them up they're just like reason and then they just never end up paying you back, and every time you hit them up they're just like, oh, I'll get it to you soon, I'll get it to you next time.
Yeah.
And when you're talking to when you're living in like an apartment and someone's doing that for their rent money, that's a pretty big concern, like that's a pretty rent money. That's a pretty big concern, like that's a pretty big red flag on their character.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I feel like there was a scene that I was reading where Jane was talking about Dorothy, and she essentially says something to the effect of, she's just gonna use him up for, the money until he leaves. That was the impression that I got.
Well, that's because Jane hates Dorothy.
Yeah, but again, that's the thing though. Like, from the context that we get from everybody else, it sets up that this is what Dorothy is like, you
Well,
know?
that's the context. That tells you that the character Jane has a grudge against her, but
Yeah,
when you the same amount of vitriol towards
he
her,
doesn't.
so I,
He
I
doesn't.
feel like as the reader, you understand that Dorothy is like a certain way, but
Yeah,
Jane feels extremely strong about her to the point
yeah,
where it's personal. She absolutely cannot stand Dorothy.
yeah,
Observer's perspective, I probably say Dorothy isn't somebody that I would trust with my money, or I wouldn't want to let her borrow my money.
yeah,
But I also don't think I would be somebody who is carry this vendetta all the
yeah,
time,
yeah.
like Jane.
Well, okay. I mean, okay, so the that makes sense. Like, I do think, I mean, she's clearly okay. So Dorothy's character is clearly one where where it's obvious that she's a little irresponsible, a little messy, and yeah, I'll give her that, but maybe it's because I can relate to that. Like I'm pretty sure I'm pretty good about money stuff. So I don't have that chip on my shoulder. But my point being, to your earlier question, so if the worst thing about her is she's a little bad with money, and the degree to which she's bad at money is debatable at this point, I think. Uh, I think that if we take what my presumption was initially, which was that the way that they set up the story is that she's just this manipulative person who's going to use Sherman up, expectation that we have of her. By the end of the story,
Well, I think that's the expectation that the other characters have of her. It's not necessarily the expectation that the readers have.
I mean, I was the reader and that was the expectation that I had. So, uh, my point
Okay.
being,
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's just one of those things where it's way.
right. But I'm just saying that by the end of it, like, she clearly stuck it out with Sherman, right?
Yeah.
So she didn't leave. And whereas I can't really think of anything that she did to Sherman he was doing to her. Like, okay, like when I think about like some of her quote unquote low points, it was stuff like showing up late, maybe not valuing his time or things like that. But he's constantly flirting with these other girls, and
He ends up cheating on her.
And there are these moments of vulnerability that she has where she clearly, like, for someone who has such a strong and cold facade, in these moments where she is vulnerable about her need of him, like, that's genuine, or it feels genuine to me at least,
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
so I think looking at the dynamic of their relationship, people expecting her to be worse for him, at the end of the day, I don't see it. Like, I just feel like one Sherman's kind of a ruinous bastard.
He's trash.
He's trash, and
He also and one of the other things he was constantly doing was just being a petty, jealous jerk about her being able to get her magazine articles published while he struggled to get his stuff published.
yeah,
And he'd have this inferiority complex and just fume about it.
Totally.
And be passive aggressive.
Yeah. And when we get to the end of the series, like, it clearly corrodes their yeah.
But what about her maybe I don't know if she's exactly like the textbook definition of an alcoholic, but I think it's fair to say she clearly had an alcohol problem, and the biggest abuse ended up leading to her dog's death.
Yeah.
That's not too good.
That's not. I mean, I guess until you mentioned it, and this might reflect the way that I was looking when I was reading it, I guess I didn't read her as being a textbook alcoholic. Like, she definitely drank a lot, and and it did lead to the death of her. Well, I guess her negligence led to the death of her dog.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know.
You don't think it was her negligence that led to her dog's death?
Oh,
It was her negligence that led to her dog's death?
oh. Like, how did the dog actually die? What? Did it drink her alcohol?
Yeah.
That
Like
was
she
the
was so
idea, right?
messy. Huh?
That was the idea, right? Was that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Alcohol poisoning.
Idea, right? Was that,
Yeah.
yeah,
Alcohol poisoning. I mean,
yeah,
she had, I guess that night she got so drunk that she stumbled home and like knocked over some bottles or something, and
yeah.
then wasn't really aware, and then her dog ended up getting alcohol poisoning after her dog lapped some up.
I guess I just looked at it as a tragic thing that happened to them. I didn't necessarily assign blame when I was looking at that. It was just a stupid thing that happened.
That says a lot about who I am, because to me it's
Yeah.
like, if you're gonna be negligent, that and your negligence leads to your dog's death, then you got a problem there, because her apartment was so messy. There was so much crap and junk. She stumbled home late, with after a long night of drinking, and didn't really pay attention to where her dog was or anything like that, and then wakes up in the morning just or I guess wakes up in the middle of the night to find her dog, lying and convulsing or whatever. A normal thing, like, I feel like stuff like that would happen to someone who has a problem.
Uh, yeah, I get what you're saying. I guess, yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just one of those things where she after herself, maybe that wouldn't have happened, or maybe if she had just been a little bit more responsible and alert when she
Yeah,
got home, maybe that could have been prevented. So
yeah,
it's super unfortunate, but
yeah,
in terms of the story, I felt like that really sorry for her, because
yeah,
her dog dies in a sad way, but you also kind of, or at least I felt kind of mad at her for letting it happen like that too,
right, right.
because I felt like it was her fault.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. I mean, I in terms of,
She didn't cheat on her man. At least you
yeah,
can say that.
exactly. Yeah, and I don't think she was nearly as manipulative as, anybody thought she was, or at
Not only
least
that, but Sherman, one of his buddies was that one douchebag. I forgot his name.
I don't know why, but looking at him, he kind of reminded me of like a warped mirror version of Sherman.
Yeah, right. Like the worst case scenario of what
Yeah,
Sherman could be if he just gave in to his worst impulses. Because what was the guy's name? James? I forgot if it was
I
James.
I know who you're talking about. I forgot his name, but he was basically just a man whore.
Yeah, the dude was just a horn dog who was hitting on everybody. Like he got
He
caught
had no
having an
scruples
affair with a
whatsoever.
married woman. He had no shame. Like
Yeah,
that's some straight douchebaggy stuff, man.
yeah, yeah, and
Stuff, man.
yeah, yeah, and I think in one scene, I don't know, at least the way that I interpreted it, but I think he was intentionally trying to drug a girl's drink,
Yeah,
but drug a girl's drink,
yeah,
but Ed ended up drinking it. I think his name is Ed, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
Ed ends up drinking it instead. Like,
yeah.
that's pretty awful. I mean, I already didn't like that guy to begin with, and
The
yeah,
fact that he's gonna give people roofies,
and
the
yeah,
fact that he's gonna give people roofies, that's
yeah,
just,
don't do that.
yeah. And and the fact that Sherman continues to be his friend even though he knows James is like that, I
Yeah,
feel like that says a lot about Sherman, man. Like,
yeah,
granted, he does have there is a scene where Sherman, man. Like,
Yeah.
granted, there is a scene where Sherman tries to talk to him when he sees James on a date with their former coworker who happens to be a married woman, but her
He's pretty
husband is
weak-willed.
serving in the military, so he's away.
Yeah.
And Sherman has a talk with him, but he doesn't actually do anything. And Sherman has a talk with him, but he doesn't actually do anything about it, you know? Like,
Yeah.
it's like, at that point, if you know somebody's like that, why would you just continue to tolerate it and
Yeah.
you know, enable them and be their friend and stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
And
I
that
don't know.
dude's response
Maybe
wasn't
it's
very
just
good
because of
either.
you know?
Yeah.
Like,
And
I
that
don't know.
dude's response
Maybe
wasn't
it's
very
just
good
because of
either.
me and like, I personally, if I do have any friends that are like that, I'm not aware of that behavior, and
Yeah.
maybe I'm just, completely naive to it. But I want to believe that if I did have a friend that was like that, if I couldn't get them to stop, I probably wouldn't be their friend. Was like that. If I couldn't get them to stop, I probably wouldn't be their friend anymore.
Yeah. And I was gonna say the dude's response when he got called out, like
Yeah,
that was a even greater indicator of how much of a bag of dicks he was.
yeah,
But
that's him.
yeah. Well, I'm sure there are a lot of people who are like him.
Yeah, that's true.
Like
That character is definitely based on a bunch of real people.
yeah. So when he gets caught, going on a date with this married woman and Sherman calls him out, his response is, she's a grown woman and she bears responsibility in this too. And like to say that, it's like, come on, man, that's maybe she does bear responsibility for this, but that doesn't absolve you of your role in this.
Yeah, exactly.
You're trash too. Like, so what? You expect me to? But right now I'm yelling at you, so
Yeah.
just take it.
Seriously, man. Seriously.
Yeah. What about you? What were the characters that I guess left an impact on you or impression?
Storyline that captivated me the most was probably the characters of Ed and Irving
Uh-huh.
Flavor.
Yeah.
So Ed is a guy in his early 20s who was Sherman's. I guess he was his best pal. Less and less of him, but Ed is a guy who is an aspiring comics creator, and in the world of Box Office Poison, the big superhero comic book publisher is this company called Zoom Comics, and they publish this in the story who was created by Irving Flavor back in the, I don't know, the golden age of comics, way back in the day, and it's persisted to the present time, which is the 90s, I guess, the mid or late 90s. There have been Night Stalker movies raking in the cash. It's kind of interesting reading this story now because of the MCU and how popular the Marvel movies are.
Yeah.
Because back in the 90s, when Box Office Poison was originally published, there weren't really too many superhero movies. There weren't really.
Batman was
Yeah,
probably the biggest one that you could think of.
yeah,
Batman 89.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the idea of a comic book company just raking in the dough because of their movie adaptations. I don't know, maybe like 25 movie adaptations. I don't know, maybe like 25 years ago that was kind of a far-fetched idea, but now it's like more relevant than ever. It's
Yeah.
like, and
Absolutely.
I mean, and that's not even to say that Marvel is raking in the dough. I mean, Disney bought Marvel, so it's Disney that's raking in the dough. But he bought Marvel, so it's Disney that's raking in the dough. But same idea basically.
Yeah.
But I like the character of Ed. I think He resonated with me just because he was a guy who was really into comics, Star Wars. Didn't have a girlfriend. Star Wars. Didn't have a girlfriend or anything like that, and was just. But he felt lonely. I don't know if he really felt depressed or anything, but he definitely wanted to find somebody. He wanted to meet women and he wanted to meet women, and he wanted to do something with his creative ideas and make comics and just make something of his life.
Yeah.
And his story is him going to Zoom and trying to apply for a job by sending in some samples, and the editor there isn't too impressed, but tells him to go look up this old artist guy named Irving Flavor because he could use an assistant. So
Yeah.
Ed meets him, and it turns out Irving Flavor is the guy who created the Night Stalker way back in the day,
Mm. Mm.
but in a story that's all too reminiscent of real life.
Yeah.
He didn't own the character that he created, and the
Yeah.
contract that he signed was, it was just a work for hire gig. So Zoom is the one that gets to control the character, rake in all the money from all the products and licensing deals and the movies and stuff. While Irving Flavor, even though he's this legend who created the most popular superhero of all time, he's
Mm.
just living in squalor, like he has
Yeah.
tiny little rats on the ground. When Ed goes to the apartment for the first time, you see a rat on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, man,
It's pretty gross.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing that sucks is that really is realistic, man.
Yeah. It's some of the older comics characters, the industry did not treat them well, after they got their value from them, a bunch of them ended up, well, not a bunch, but I know quite a few of them ended up medical bills, like what's his name? Who's the guy that created Howard the Duck?
Steve Gerber.
Yeah, like didn't he have a bunch of medical bills towards the end of his life? Like,
Maybe. That sounds right, but I'm not exactly sure. I don't really remember is that he did have a lot of, he tried to take Marvel to court, like he tried to win back Howard the Duck, and he
yeah,
fought Marvel, and he did a lot for creators' rights. So he didn't necessarily make a bunch of money from the
yeah,
characters he created. He died in poverty or anything, but yeah,
okay,
it was pretty sad because I know that he died fairly young and he had some health problems, and
yeah,
I don't know if he had been treated better, maybe that could have been prevented. I'm not
yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's like that with a lot of creators, man. I mean,
It is.
you were telling me about watching that documentary the other day about Bill Finger.
Yeah.
Dude, Bill Finger created Batman, and that guy died. He died in poverty.
He died in like a dingy, like studio apartment, and um, I think initially they had thought that he was in this thing called a pauper's grave. So when he died, they found him, and no one was there, and then he wasn't married, and they basically just they initially were just gonna put him in this thing called a pauper's grave, which is just like a plot of land with no headstone, just a number indicator that they just throw you in. It's yeah, the symbolism is like really messed up because it's this dude who created all of the most well-known elements of Batman, everything that almost
Mhm.
all of the things that you know about the Batman he created, and he was denied throughout his entire life, and
Mhm.
even in death, for him to be put in this unmarked grave. The idea of him being put in this unmarked grave, like that just tops it off, you know?
Yeah, it's horrible, man.
Yeah,
Horrible.
yeah,
An episode of Off Panel, the podcast from Sketched, David Harper,
yeah,
and he was interviewing Abraham Reisman or Reisman. Sorry, I forget how to pronounce his last name, but the guy who wrote that he wrote the biography, the new biography, or not auto, he wrote the biography, the new biography of Stan Lee that just came out fairly recently. I think it's called Excelsior or something like that.
Yeah.
But during that interview with the biographer, I learned that in his research he talked to Larry Lieber, who is Stan Lee's younger brother. So Larry Lieber is still alive. He's like 89 years old right now. And he 9 years old right now. And he did a lot of stuff too. Like he co-created a bunch of the key characters of Marvel. I want to say he co-created Ant-Man.
Oh.
And Thor, I believe. But he also did a lot of early work on those characters. Iron Man also, I think.
Right.
So he had such an instrumental hand in helping Marvel create and establish their most famous and long-lasting characters, but at this point in his life, he's 89 years old. He's just living in this tiny little rat hole of an apartment in New York, and he's just fortunate to live there because I guess it's like rent controlled or something where he doesn't have to. I guess it's like rent controlled or something where he doesn't have to pay,
exorbitant rates.
Yeah,
rents.
but it's like a really small place according to the biographer who talked to him. So just hearing stuff like that, man, it kind of like it just kind of makes me mad to think that these guys that created all these characters that are beloved all over the world and have lasted so long and made Marvel and Disney so much money. It's like, man, Disney made so much money from every single one of their movies. Like they made what, like a couple $100,000 for these guys that created those characters. Come on.
Yeah.
What the heck, man?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I'm sure it's nice to get a little thank you acknowledgement in the credits, but I'm pretty sure it'd be nicer to have like a few $1,000.
Yeah, not starving would be nice.
Yeah, Andy, can't you give him something?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Or even, Jack Kirby and the whole ordeal with him and his kids when the Avengers movie was coming out. Like there was about these comic book companies not giving a crap about the people that created the characters, and that's what sucks. And you really see that play out in Box Office Poison in the story with Irving and Ed, because kind of figuring out how to work with each other, but it's also Ed encouraging Irving to kind of fight for his rights too.
Yeah.
It starts when they get set up with an interview with this magazine or a fanzine or something called, I think, Comics Zine, but they're clearly based on the Comics Journal because they're championing creators' rights and independent comics and things like that.
Right.
And they want to stick it to the man. They want to stick it to Zoom Comics.
Yeah.
So to see that it was way too reminiscent of real life, man.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Even the way that it ended, the way that whole story played out. Yeah, Irving Flavor was kind of nearing the end of his life because he was pretty old by this point in the story.
Yeah.
And he kind of just
he was a tired old man.
Yeah, he was kind of a tired old man,
Yeah.
and it maybe that I think that is a realistic and logical conclusion.
Yeah.
But there was still something where I think was still something where I think Ed kind of expressed it in the story too, where he kind of wished that, well, not kind of, he explicitly wished that Irving had kept on fighting, and
Yeah.
that's that's probably the same thing that I felt when I was reading it too. It's like that's probably the same thing that I felt when I was reading it too. It's like,
Yeah.
dude, he settled for $48,000 when their movie is making like hundreds and hundreds of millions, and
Yeah.
there's been like 6 movies.
And they're
Like
probably going to be
48,000
more.
is nothing.
Yeah. They were saying that be
48,000
more.
is nothing.
Yeah. They were saying that 48,000 was probably how much they spent to cater the last movie,
Yeah, exactly.
you know? But yeah, I mean, you said it yourself. There's this one scene. You said it yourself. There's this one scene where Irving even acknowledges that they've got all these lawyers, like, and I got nothing. Who am I gonna hire to lawyer up for me? And
Mhm.
yeah, lawyer up for me. And
Mhm.
yeah, I get that. Like, there's this desire to want to see justice be done, and it's hard when the person that you want to see justice for doesn't even want to fight for it to doesn't even want to fight for it to the bitter end, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's it's comics, man. Comics will break your heart.
yeah, yeah, it's pretty depressing.
Yeah.
it, it's pretty depressing.
Yeah. 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 Like I said, man, it's just too close to home, man. Too realistic. That part was too realistic.
Yeah, yeah, it really is weird that I watched that. So the name of the documentary was Batman and Bill, and it's the story of Bill Finger. And reading this comic, it really was like it felt like a moment. This really is reminiscent of the documentary that I just watched, and like there are just so many plot elements that just synced up with the true story of Bill Finger, who again he created all of the deep story elements of Batman that we recognize as Batman today, but because Bob Kane was a bastard, he decided to take credit for himself,
Hmm.
and he used legal means to essentially screw Bill Finger out of Batman and Bill. Is the documentary of one guy's mission to get recognition for Bill Finger.
Yeah. That's why so many comics, I think it was up until the last couple years, but for or watch a Batman movie, it would always say Batman created by Bob Kane.
Yeah,
And that's just messed up, man.
yeah, and like to
Bob
add
Kane was a
ins
hack.
yeah, to add insult to injury, in the documentary, there's this scene of you Bob Kane in the later years of his life, and like you have to keep in mind, so Bob Kane at this point had monopolized the idea of Batman, and when Batman 1989, when that movie came out, and it like did gangbusters, the fact that his name was on Batman, so he was not suffering in obscurity like a lot of these creators, because he could go out there, and even if he wasn't explicitly making money on Batman, just by saying that he was the guy that created Batman, and selling his other stuff that he did, he was off that more than enough money to like live well on. and
Yeah.
and they did this interview with him, where he was basically talking about Bill Finger, and at at this point, Bill Finger had died fairly recently, but Bob Kane was saying, fairly recently, but Bob Kane was saying, I wish I could go back to 20 years earlier and give Bill Finger the credit that he deserves. But the messed up thing was, even up until the end of his life, he still wasn't, like, when he could have done something to help Bill Finger, he did nothing.
Yeah.
You know, like when he could have done something to help Bill Finger, he did nothing.
Yeah.
You know?
He didn't actually mean what he said. He was just trying to sound good for whoever he was talking to,
Yeah.
you know?
He was just trying to sound like a gracious bastard.
Yeah. But actions speak louder than words, man. And just because you say that you wish you could have done something, actions speak louder than words, man. And just because you say that you wish you could have done something for somebody, I mean, you know what would have been better? If you had actually done something for him. Come
for real.
on.
Yeah.
Like, even at that point, even after Bill Finger had died, why didn't Bob Kane go back and tell DC,
Exactly.
hey, we need to put
Exactly.
hey, we need to put Bill Finger's name in the credits. It can't just be my name. You know, like if he really meant what he said, he could have done something like that, but he never did.
Yeah, he never did. So, Bob Kane, you're a toe rag.
Total scumbag in comics.
Yeah.
Episodes where we do the top 25 scumbags in comics. He'd be up there.
He's a pretty big one. He's a huge one. Like, it's sad, like, all those years that I grew up reading Batman comics, Bob Kane was definitely a name that showed up really often, and like that I automatically associated with Batman, even though I wasn't reading a whole bunch of Batman comics, you know?
Yeah, because his name was always in the credits, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if you watch a cartoon or a movie or something, or a TV show, it would always say blatant lie.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, Box Office Poison does capture that story pretty well, you know? And if you have any interest in, I get it, like a lot of the litigious stuff that happens about creators' rights behind closed doors might not necessarily be, on the face of it, the most interesting or compelling stories, but in Box Office Poison, I do think it was pretty interesting to see. I do think it was pretty interesting to see how that story plays out, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. That was for me, I think it was probably the most compelling story. I mean, all of the stories grabbed my attention because I just devoured this book, but I think that story in particular captured my attention, and the character of Ed, just him being this guy who was like, he wasn't, as compared to the other characters, I didn't really feel like he wasn't as compared to the other characters, I didn't really feel like he was a jerk or anything, you know, like he wasn't a bad person or somebody that would piss me off just by his existence.
Yeah.
He actually seemed like somebody that I could get along with.
Yeah. Yeah. He was probably the second in the story. Yeah, he part of me wants to say that he was harmless. So I don't know if that's taken as a compliment, but characters in the book, I would say the harmless aspect of him is certainly more appealing than what they had to offer.
Yeah, if I had to choose between the harmless dude or the horn dog, I would choose the harmless dude.
Yeah, for sure, man. For sure. For sure.
In terms of some of the main themes of the story, Albert, what were the things that stood out to you?
I think so. One of the obvious ones that we mentioned earlier is that it's a story about characters in the story were 20-somethings who were struggling to find themselves in life, whether it be professionally or personally in terms of relationships. or even in terms of family history, or in terms of family history, or tradition. But it just felt like it was a lot of characters that were just aimless in their direction in their 20s especially, and it made sense in their 20s especially, and it made sense that these people who just recently exited college and were on their way to not quite being full blown adults, but not quite being full blown adults, but on their way to accumulating the experiences that would make them adults. That
Mm-hmm.
it would just mean that they would just kind of point themselves in all directions just in an attempt to find the person that they would ultimately want to be, you know?
Yeah.
So I do think that search is definitely one of the themes of the story. Um,
Yeah, just that.
yeah,
I
exactly.
guess in a way, is it would you call it a coming of age story or because
Uh,
no, I don't think I would call it coming of age really, but there are certain elements of it that kind of remind me of something. I guess I would say it's I wouldn't call it a coming of age story because at the end of it, not everybody
yeah,
comes out,
exactly.
more
Not
mature
everyone
and more
grows.
noble. Yeah,
Yeah,
some people are still just as
yeah,
gross or even worse than they were at the beginning of the story.
yeah, yeah,
Journey of trying to discover who they are.
yeah. Um, there was one other like scene. Okay, so I'm trying to look for a way to articulate it, but there was one which stuck with me, and it was this it was this it was a pretty random moment, but Sherman is outside of his I forget what exactly had happened, but he was outside of I believe he was outside of his bookstore or something when and you know they haven't seen each other in a long while, and just being caught on the spot in that moment, he's trying to just go with the moment just to see where it'll lead him. And he's
Yeah.
talking, his dad left his mom when he was just a boy, and he hasn't seen him since. And we don't really know much else after that. But as they're sitting there in the diner and they're talking, um, we come to dad's life that he's just a massive screw up who, after leaving Sherman's mother for after abandoning the family, he starts a
Hmm.
new life with this other woman. But at the point where he comes back in contact, with Sherman, it turns out he cheated on her too, or not too, but he ended up cheating on her, and he was gonna, and he was in this situation where that life was falling apart, and
Yeah.
where that life was falling apart, and
Yeah.
he tries to uh justify his actions by thing by talking about it in these terms where he tries to make it sound like he's this really liberated person. He tries to make it sound like he's this really liberated person, and how he's been living his whole life trying to make other people happy, but you know,
It's like, shut up, dude. You're a
yeah,
deadbeat and a cheat.
yeah, and
You're a louse.
he was trying to make it sound like it was this really,
You're a louse.
he was trying to make it sound like it was this really enlightened thing where it was like, when you get as old as me, you'll see that living your entire life trying to make people happy only makes you sad, and it's not as easy or as black and white as that. And Sherman just kind of loses his crap, and he's like, you're such or as black and white as that. And Sherman just kind of loses his crap, and he's like, you're such a self-centered ass. And and this, for you to talk about this like it's some sort of life lesson or like some sort of revelation, that lesson or like some sort of revelation, that this, living your life caring about other people or being considerate of other people is some sort of detriment to yourself. Like, yeah, like, you're totally just trash, and he just like flips out on his dad, and all his dad does is he tries to take this weird moral high ground where he's like, you don't know what you're talking about, and like how dare you talk to me like this, blah blah blah. And he's just completely oblivious to just how much of a selfish bastard he is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's I was thinking about it as you were recounting the incident, but it's almost like Sherman is not too far from the tree, like he's the apple
Yeah.
that fell from the tree, like
Yeah,
father
yeah,
like
yeah.
son.
No,
He
and
might,
that's
yeah,
exactly. No, and that's yeah, you brought me back to the original thread that I was thinking of, but it feels like is this idea that it's this idea, like, so I've only briefly thought about it, so I'm don't it's not fully formed in my head how to describe it, but it almost feels like the idea is that life lessons and changes are a foregone conclusion, like because
hmm
of television and movies and things, that this idea that, oh, once you get closure, once you learn your life lesson, like person now, and you know and that's it, you ride off into the sunset, you're no longer a bastard, these aren't problems anymore, right? But
if only it were that simple.
yeah, but exactly, but Sherman's response is quite obviously that that's not how it works. You have to. At that point, he even repeats a line that was said to him earlier by uh, that girl, Clarice.
Uh, you mean that girl that he cheats with?
Yeah,
I think her name is Caprice.
Caprice, right? Sherman's dad says to him, "When you get to my age, you'll find that it's not so easy to judge people." And Sherman repeats this line that Caprice says to him earlier in the story, and what he essentially says is, maybe I won't be so quick to judge, but that still doesn't make what you're doing right,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah,
And yeah, and I think for a story about people who are growing and aging, and this idea that we want to believe that at the end of the future that everyone has a happy ending, and whatever emotional journeys that they went on uh, provided them with closure or something, or whatever we think closure is, and they ended up being better off for it. And we all want to believe that they're going to be sitting at a sunset saying it was a good journey, I'm glad that it worked out that way, and I'm glad that I learned to be a better person because of it. When in
yeah.
reality, that's not always the case.
Some people don't learn anything, man.
Some people don't learn anything. Yeah, exactly. So I do think that the theme in the story that kind of jumped out at me.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I
What
think
about
the other things that I saw were just kind of, they might be emotional concepts that might be common to people who are in their 20s or thereabouts. Just things like dealing with feelings of depression or loneliness or feeling like an outsider because you don't know what you're doing with your life. Just that kind of aimlessness that I guess a lot of fiction about loneliness or feeling like an outsider because you don't know what you're doing with your life. Just that kind of aimlessness that I guess a lot of fiction about slackers, characters in their 20s kind of, you know, emphasizes that I guess a lot of fiction about slackers, characters in their 20s kind of, you know, emphasizes that idea of aimlessness. I think that's one of the recurring themes that kind of, you know, emphasizes that idea of aimlessness. I think that's one of the recurring themes that jumps out at me. I don't know if it really has any pronouncements to make on the idea of aimlessness,
Yeah.
but it does certainly feel like many of these characters undergo experiences where they deal with, and for each of them, it looks different, but it's still something, regardless of the shape or form it takes, it is still something that is a common denominator for most, if not.
Yeah, it does feel like, I can't say for sure, but I want to say it feels like each of them goes through some different variation of aimlessness, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's another question, Albert. Office Poison, the title of this comic.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Like, I finished reading the book, and to be quite honest, I couldn't for the life of me figure out why that was. I feel like with a lot of other comic titles are, usually that first thing that's the gateway into whatever it is you're going to read. And a lot of the times with a lot of the books, it usually makes sense, right? Like, maybe this is me being generous, but I feel like if it's fine to good, it's something that I find tolerable, you know?
Yeah.
But like in order to be bad, it would have to be an incredibly bad title, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Babysitting by
I might have more to do because of the fact of that he's the author of it.
But
Is
with
that a
box
real
office,
book?
no,
Okay.
I hope not. But with Box Office Poison, like I'm not. It wasn't a bad title, but it was certainly something with some sort of connection between the title and the content, and I can't for the life of me figure out what it is. I was curious as to what your thoughts on that were. Maybe you could help illuminate that for me.
Yeah, so I felt the same way, man. Like, decided to title his comics. Why he decided to title this comic "Box Office Poison," and from what I know, in general usage, the idiom "box office poison" refers to an actor, like a movie actor, who I guess has a string of his name is just attached with failure, so he doesn't.
Yeah.
Nobody really would want somebody like that to be the leading man of
Yeah.
their movie.
Yeah.
So
So
in that sense, that actor becomes box office poison, right? He becomes somebody
yeah.
that they want to avoid.
Yeah.
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 Not only crap, but crap that doesn't sell.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like
Exactly.
that's an important
It
distinction.
is. It is. There are people that make crap that that rakes in like millions and billions of dollars, and at the end of the day, as long as it makes money, the people that make it don't care.
Yeah. But I was
But
thinking
yeah.
maybe The only thing I could really think of, and this might be a stretch, man, because it's just my imagination working, trying to,
Care.
yeah. But I was
But
thinking
yeah.
maybe the only thing I could really think of, and this might be a stretch, man, because it's just my imagination working, trying to concoct a reason why Box Office Poison is the title. But maybe it's because stretch, man, because it's just my imagination working, trying to concoct a reason why Box Office Poison is the title. But maybe it's because so many of the characters in this story are they're we've just Box Office Poison is the title. But maybe it's because so many of the characters in this story are they're we've just discussed a good handful of them, but so many of the characters in this are people that story are people that I think most of us, even though we recognize bits of our friends and perhaps even ourselves in these characters, I think objectively speaking, chances are if we had the choice with these characters, and maybe from that perspective, it's like these characters are box office poison because you don't want them in your life.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. Based on your description, I feel like that's probably it's the most sensible explanation that I could come up with. But um,
I'm
it's
curious
better
if
than
anyone has
anything
ever.
I've got.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, that could be a stretch, man. Like that's just like I was trying to think of a reason why, and that's all I could come up with. But I wonder if anyway he named his comic Box Office Poison.
We'll have to
That
check that out.
yeah, yeah.
Like
If anybody listening out there knows the reason why he named the comic Box Office Poison, hit us up because I'm really curious.
yeah, illuminate for us.
Think of the book, man.
I thought it was great. I thought it was a great character study. I thought it was a great, journey through the lives of these people. It was something where reading it, I wanted to know how their lives turned out. I wanted to know how their stories ended,
Hmm.
and it's thick. And, it obviously took work to read it, but it wasn't laborious in terms of
Yeah,
my enjoyment of it, right? Like it didn't feel like work when I was reading it, you know?
yeah. It
So,
wasn't. It wasn't like you had to force yourself and pages.
yeah.
Only 250 more pages.
Yeah.
You know.
I guess my one warning is if you're the kind of person who feels like you have to read books where you have to like the characters, that might be hard for you. I
Yeah.
mean, you should go into it knowing that not everyone is um, you know, a
Likeable.
noble or
Yeah.
or even likable person. And in addition to that, yeah, I would recommend it to people who slice of life or people who um yeah, people who don't consider that entertaining. Like I think there's a lot here if you're willing to take that extra energy and take that effort. There's a lot that can be gained from reading it,
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. This comic has a lot. It's got drama. It's got romance and relationships. It's got comedy. Like this comic was the comedy. Like there's some pretty funny stuff in here.
yeah,
Like there's some scenes where the apartment where Sherman and Stephen and Jane live in, their landlady she's kind of crazy, and she
yeah,
gets it, and she's always like policing everybody's activities and stuff.
yeah,
And there are points where Alex Robinson goes full on cartoony with the artwork there, and it's funny, man. Like it's stuff that
Yeah.
genuinely made me smile.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like we've talked so much about the story, but yeah, I feel like we've talked so much about the story, but I do want to emphasize that the artwork is excellent, man. It's I think when I first read Tricked, I thought the reason why I was super into Tricked was because why I was super into Tricked was because I was at a period in my life when I just wanted to read more indie comics and just discover stuff that wasn't your typical Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse stuff,
Yeah.
and a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
and a lot of I guess a lot of indie comics. You know, the arts. If you're used to Marvel and DC and those kind of books, the art in a lot of alternative comics is quite different. It's a very different style,
Yeah.
but
Totally.
quite different. It's a very different style.
Yeah.
But
Totally.
when I picked up Tricked and I saw the artwork in that, there was something really accomplished about his style in Tricked. And Box Office Poison is his earlier work. And I think if you look at like the first earlier work, and I think if you look at like the first 20 or 40 pages of Box Office Poison, it's quite different from looking at even the end of this book, let alone his next book.
Yeah.
So
No,
you
I
can
I
see
to-
the evolution of his artwork, man. And
totally.
it's all so
No,
you can
I
see
to
the evolution of his artwork, man. And
totally.
it's always a cool thing to see when a creator begins something
Gross.
in his kind of his like rawest, purest form, and you see him just get better and better and improve over and better and improve over the next couple hundred pages, and
Mm.
yet there's still a sense of cohesion to it. Like it's not like the first part is so bad that it doesn't fit with the rest of it. No, his early pages are still solid, but you can just tell that there's a difference with every chapter.
Yeah. 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 I I'm totally behind you on that, man.
Yeah, yeah. So overall, man, I agree that Box Office Poison is a great piece of work. Definitely recommend it. If not your typical mainstream Marvel, Image, or DC, or I guess even like Dark Horse or Boom, check out some top shelf comics and check out some of the work that Alex Robinson has done. Maybe Box Office.
Yeah. Too Cool to Be Forgotten is substantially shorter, and I think um it's as good, or I mean it's good. It's great. They're both great works, but
Hmm.
I would recommend that if you want something that's not as daunting to a.
Speaking of recommendations, man, what are some of the other books you would recommend to somebody who did read Box Office Poison and enjoyed it?
Um so the recommendations that I was gonna make, they're not all actually books. So I was, and I would actually recommend that our viewers watch that if they have any interest. It's a documentary about the story of Bill Finger, and it's tied very heavily. Their story is very similar in Box Office Poison. So there's that a lot of parallels there. If you're interested in that sort of David and Goliath
Hmm.
litigation sort of story.
Hmm.
Um, the end that I actually thought of while I was reading this is I'd recommend BoJack Horseman. It was
Oh.
a It's a Netflix show, and it's an animated series. And I think after reading Box Office Poison, I want to say that BoJack Horseman feels like it would be it'd be like if you followed the story of some of the worst characters in box office poison, the characters that box office poison, the characters that didn't grow up, that never learned a lesson. And if you fast forwarded to them in their 40s and you followed their lives while they were in their 40s, I feel like that's what Bojack Horseman would be. While they were in their 40s, I feel like that's what Bojack Horseman would be. Because essentially Bojack Horseman is about a washed up TV star who, in his 20s had like all this opportunity, but he just ended up but he just ended up being a selfish, miserable bastard and continued to live that way up until his 40s. And it's just this story of a guy who never learned the lesson of, how it requires you to be a good person. So we were talking about box office poison earlier and how, Sherman was upset at his dad because, his dad was talking about, his journey in life and how, and somehow that's noble. And in BoJack Horseman, it's sort of the same thing where he has to get to this place where he needs to tell himself, he's been constantly telling himself, I just need to do what's best for me. But what I've been learning is, if you want to be a good person, you should actually try to be a good person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds like common sense, but I'm sure a lot of people need common sense.
Yeah. Well, and not to go on too much of a tangent, I mean, the thing that I do enjoy about BoJack doesn't. So it's something that deconstructs the idea of sitcoms, and the problem with sitcoms being that people have these problems, and at the end of 20 minutes, your life goes back to normal, and your problems all go away. And people who watch a lot of TV, it feels like people who watch a lot of TV, it feels like that's how they kind of that's the lens that they view their world through. And the thing about BoJack is it kind of refutes that idea, and it's the idea that people really have their ups and downs, and it's the idea that people really have their ups and downs, and this idea that you overcome one hurdle and all of a sudden you're this entirely different person moving forward. It's not realistic at all.
Yeah.
So
it takes a lot more work than that.
It takes persistence. Exactly. Yeah.
Work than that.
It takes persistence. Exactly. Yeah. The last comic that I would recommend, or the one comic that I would recommend, is Life Between Panels. It's by Ethan Young, and it's a comic by Dark Horse. And it's pretty similar to Box Office Poison in that it's about an aimless young man who works on comic books for a living, and he's at a point in his life where he's trying to figure out the direction that he wants to go. Comic book characters come to life and help him to sort it out, but it is about him making some tough decisions and trying to decide the person that he ultimately wants to be.
Yeah, that's one I've had my eye on ever since I heard you mention it. I want to check.
I'll bring it over sometime. You should check it out. It's worth checking out, man. It's good.
Sweet, man.
Yeah. What about you? What recommendations you got?
Well, I already mentioned Tricked because it was his book that he did after Box Office Poison. It's kind of similar in the sense that but the difference is that I don't think every character, it's been a while since I've read it, so hopefully I'm not fudging the details too much, but I don't think every character was in their 20s and a slacker. It was an ensemble story that actually coalesces in a way that Box Office Poison doesn't exactly do, because from what I remember, I I'd say Tricked has a more tightly plotted story structure, and
Yeah.
everybody's story does end up like colliding at a certain
Yeah.
point. Does end up like colliding at a certain
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. I remember
It
that
kind
as
of
well.
reminds me of that movie from, I don't know, maybe like 15 years ago. Do you remember this movie called Crash?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It like from what I remember about that movie, it's been a while since I've seen that too, but I just remember finding about that movie. It's been a while since I've seen that too, but I just remember finding a lot of similarities between the two because they kind of came out around the same time.
Yeah.
But from what I remember, it was another big ensemble cast, and at the very end, something happens that brings every story together. And something happens that brings every story together, or every character together in an
Mm.
interesting way. And Tricked also takes place in the same universe as Box Office Poison, I think, because Caprice is one of the characters in Tricked, and she's a minor character here in Box Office Poison.
Mm.
She's that girl when he's supposed to be dating Dorothy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also shorter than Box Office Poison. It's only like half as long, I think,
Mm.
maybe like 300 pages.
Yeah. Yeah, I have the hardcover version of that I bought maybe like a year ago, maybe
Oh,
2 years ago.
nice.
I'm looking forward to the chance that I get to read that again, man.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely, I'd say reading Box Office Poison made me want to reread Tricked. So
Mm.
maybe I'll pick it up sometime again soon.
Yeah.
Another recommendation for another comic recommendation is Sean Kelly McKeever. I'm not sure when he decides to use like his full name and when he's just Sean McKeever.
I was gonna say maybe when he's on a murder spree and he decides to be to use his. Oh no, all serial killers have 3 names.
Yeah, like John Wayne Gacy.
Yeah.
There's Lee Harvey Oswald. I
Lee,
guess he's not a serial killer, but he's still a killer.
what's his name? Oh, I guess Ted Bundy was just Ted Bundy. They never went with
Yeah.
his.
There's yeah. Don't. Where you at,
You heard
Zach?
it here, guys.
Oh, I'm just playing. I love Zach.
Yeah.
There are a few different artists on The Waiting Place. Mike Norton is the guy whose name I remember. Apologies to the other artists who. I believe there's a 1-volume trade paperback edition published by IDW, but this is another indie comic, and it's kind of slice of life. I guess I call it slice of life. It's about a group of characters who are younger than the characters in Box Office Poison. I think these characters are in high school, maybe. And the other big difference is that instead of taking place in a big city like New York, The Waiting Place takes place in some small town in Wisconsin. But the similarity for me between these two books is that The Waiting Place is also about trying to find your way in life, trying to figure out what you want to do. With The Waiting Place is because the characters are younger and they live in a place that they want to get out of. It's about part of it is because they want to grow up and move on with life.
Yeah.
And they also want to just literally move to anywhere else. Yeah. Yeah. Like that's a comic where the title makes sense on multiple levels. Yeah. Like that's a comic where the title makes sense on multiple levels because The Waiting Place is it's like their age, that stage of life where when you're a teenager or an adolescent. And it's also like the literal place where they have to wait until they can go somewhere better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Wait until they can go somewhere better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense.
So I'd say if you're in the mood for another indie comic that's about similar themes, The Waiting Place by Sean Kelly McKeever is a good place to go. Sean Kelly McKeever is a good place to go.
There was one other one that I wanted to mention, which was Local by Brian Wood and Ryan Kelly. I like to give it a little bit of that Albert flavor.
You know what make it have Albert flavor is if you used your 1920s Chicago gangster voice.
See? Locale, see? It's not even a 1920s gangster voice anymore. I feel like I'm just growling.
By Oni Press. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that comic too, man. That's some good stuff.
It's another like indie comic about a young 20 something, and if I had to be completely transparent, I didn't read the whole thing. It's the sort of comic that you can read where you can read the single issues individually and you gain something from reading them individually. But I mean, clearly there's also a there's also a longer overarching narrative. I probably haven't gotten the full effect of it, but from what I have read, it's essentially about a young woman who wanders from city to city as she experiences life, on the road, life and growing up on the road, life and growing up on the road, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, this was a series I when it came out, I was buying the monthly issues, and at the end of it I ended up just buying the hardcover because I
Yeah.
liked the hardcover. But the interesting thing about local or the hardcover, but the interesting thing about local, or I don't know if you want to call it a gimmick or the hook, but the one of the things about it is that it was 12 issues and each issue was a different year in the life of the main character, Megan. So it starts off with her as a young the main character, Megan. So it starts off with her as a young lady, and then, 12 years pass by and she's a different person, or just, more mature person by the end of the story compared to where she was at the beginning of the story. So it really feels like you're getting the slice of life, in the sense that each issue or
Is
each chapter.
literally a slice of her life.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like sending Moon Knight to the moon.
We're having Daredevil fight the devil. Comics, we're still talking about Marvel characters.
That's great.
All right, man. You have any other thoughts or anything else you want to say before we get out of here?
No, man. I just want to reiterate the fact that you guys should all check out.
Written by Alex Robinson. Check it out. This is Between the Gutters signing off. Thank you for listening. We will catch you next time. I believe in our next episode we are going to be reading The Incal, Volume 1 by Alejandro Jodorowsky and Mobius. So stay tuned for that. I'm actually not super looking forward to checking this out and talking about it with you next time, Albert.
It'll be new to us, and it'll be fun to see what our observations and takeaways from that comic are going to be, because this is a pretty popular, pretty famous comic, well regarded.
Yeah, it's one of the big gaps, and I don't know a lot of European comics. Like my European comics is like, okay, I've read some Judge Dredd, I've read Black Sad, that's pretty much it. All right, everybody, peace out. You still there, Albert? Albert? I no longer hear you. Hello?